7 Red Cross volunteers from Southern Nevada have deployed to Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, and Arkansas to assist communities hit by deadly flooding and tornadoes. The group of volunteers are part of a national effort providing shelter, meals, supplies, and emotional support to those in need. The Red Cross is working around the clock in 8 states with nearly 800 disaster workers on the ground. Violent storms across southern and central U.S. have claimed at least 19 lives in 7 states since Wednesday. In some areas, nearly an entire season's worth of rain fell in just a few days. As the storm system moves out, forecasters warn of lingering threats. Rapidly rising rivers and tributaries are now flooding communities, some of which have never faced such devastation. With rivers cresting now and others set to peak by midweek, many fear the worst is still to come.